Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Scully, contributing editor at The Hill, and thank you for joining us for our Future of Jobs Summit. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsor, Southern Company, and its initiative, Mother Earth is Hiring, for supporting today's very important series of conversations. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has spearheaded a revolution in the workforce. And now, more than 2 years later, workers and employers still looking for answers to questions surrounding the future of jobs. And so this afternoon, we will try to find answers to some of them, including what will the jobs of the future look like and which sectors could see the most growth. As you know, new skills and roles are emerging each and every day. How can companies remain ahead of the curve? And what does this mean for upskilling and transitioning workers into new, in-demand jobs? How can women who left the workforce in really record numbers during this pandemic receive the support they need to return to the workplace? We'll unpack all of these questions with a terrific group of experts in this space. But before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag TheHillJobs. And we'll also have an exciting new interactive feature debuting on this show over the course of the program. We will be displaying 4 polling questions. They're all connected to today's topics, the future of jobs. We want to know what you think, and we've made it easy to participate. So you can pollev.com/thehillevents, or you can use the QR code on the poll slide or at the bottom of the screen. At the end of the program, we will share the findings. We are broadcasting live, and as with any live stream, of course, you could experience some occasional trouble with the video. So simply refresh the page, and in most cases, it should fix the problem. I want to begin with our first guest, Congressman Jim Langevin. He's a Democrat from Rhode Island. He's also the co-chair of the Congressional Career and Technical Education Caucus. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us here on Hill TV.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to begin with what we're seeing in the workplace right now, coming at a time where we're seeing record high inflation, record low unemployment, and yet a real demand for employers to hire the workers. Who's controlling this agenda right now, the workers or the employer?
Well, obviously the workers are the ones with, if they have the right skills, that they can now demand top dollar. It's a whole new world out there. Employers need to work more closely with the employees or prospective employees to try to find the right worker for the right job. But the American worker, especially those with lower skills, are looking for a change, and they're looking to get those high-paying jobs. But those, of course, require a high degree of skills, and we need to plan effectively going forward to make sure that we have the right workers with the right skills to do the jobs that are available, because there is a huge skills gap in the country, and yet it offers great potential for, again, low-skilled workers to upskill and get higher paying jobs.
So from your perspective, what is a skills-based education, and how, more importantly, do we fill that gap that you're alluding to?
So think of advanced manufacturing. It's not the old manufacturing of noisy, dirty factories with, say, low skills that are needed to do the jobs that have been done in the past. Advanced manufacturing now is working with computer programming, working with robotics, advanced manufacturing equipment like CNC machines and the like. All of those things require a higher skill workforce than traditionally had been in the past, especially when you think about green energy technology. This is going to be a whole wave of new jobs coming in the future that in many ways are here today. So these are things that we're focusing on, and the caucus that I co-chair with my friend and colleague, G.T. Thompson, he and I are determined to take a modern approach to career and technical education. CTE prepares students and workers for labor-intensive trades and more.
As you know, this pandemic has really been transformational on so many different levels, changing the way we work and live. How has it changed the workplace from your standpoint, and are we doing enough to make sure that those who want to get back into the workplace have the skills and the training that they need?
Yeah, I think the workplace has changed a lot, and even our focus on what types of jobs that are available are out there. And so we want to make sure that both in teaching skills at the high school level are ready to meet the workforce needs. That's one of the things that GT and I, my colleague, the co-chair of the CT caucus, that we insisted on when we revamped the Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. One of the requirements is that we have to have employers and businesses at the table when curricula is developed, so that what we're teaching in schools is relevant to the skills that businesses need right now. So that is there. But there's also things like transportation, workforce center of excellence, the Cybersecurity Skills Integration Act. That's something else. Cybersecurity is a big deal right now. We all know that it's important. We saw what happened when ransomware attacks occurred on the Colonial Pipeline, for example, and we need to make sure that that workers have the right skills and cybersecurity to make sure that they're defending networks that they would be working on and the equipment they would be working on.
And Congressman, obviously it's difficult to paint a broad brush with so many different sectors of the economy. When it comes to career and technical education, what do employers need to do in order to keep, train, and retain those employees into the workplace, into their place of employment?
Sure. Well, obviously offering work that is meaningful and challenging, but also that pays well is what employers really need to be focusing on. But obviously the jobs that are available right now, say in the energy sector, you think about OT, operational technology, it allows for great efficiency and remotely controlling the equipment that is on the network. But with that comes the vulnerability of cybersecurity intrusions that could occur. So making sure that your workforce is upskilled, that the skills that they have remain relevant are important. So employers offering the opportunities for their workforce to continue to sharpen their skills and making sure that they're properly trained so that when they're installing, say, or monitoring, maintaining this operational technology, that it's a forethought rather than an afterthought is really essential.
And you obviously represent a state that has a large number of manufacturing facilities. So what are you seeing in Rhode Island? And are the employers able to keep the workers in their manufacturing plants in Rhode Island and throughout New England?
Yeah, obviously we're seeing like everywhere, a changing dynamic, changing workforce and technology needs. So you think of technology squaring 18 months, we've all heard that before. Well, that means that the equipment that employees are working on and the skills they need is also changing. And so it's a constant dynamic of keeping your skills relevant, but getting ready for the next technology changes that would be occurring. Something else that we're seeing here in Rhode Island is the transition to the green energy technology. We were the first state in the country to have a functioning wind farm off our coast. That means you need the people with the right skills to obviously install the equipment, maintain the equipment, and any upgrades that will come going forward. So at the Community College of Rhode Island, for example, they're using career and technical education funds to develop the workforce needed to do that type of green energy installation and maintenance for as we transition into this green energy economy.
And Congressman Langevin, what I'm hearing you saying is, I think what my mom and dad always said is you never stop learning, but really today, technology is changing so quickly, so rapidly, it is, I guess, safe to say more important than ever before. Yeah,
it really is. It's so important. We all need to be lifelong learners, but now as technology is changing, it's more important than ever. I'm excited about the future of, again, a green energy economy, what that will offer, and both in terms of the products that will be produced, but the jobs that it will afford people, again, with the right skills and the right know-how. They're going to be earning a good living going forward. And by the way, it's also important to think about this in terms of perhaps workers that had been marginalized or been left behind in the past. Having a diverse workforce is really a pathway to success. It has to be a forethought rather than afterthought. So that's something else that sort of challenge employers to be mindful of. That how do we bring on that workforce that is diverse and robust and that's going to hopefully stay with the company for a very long time and help them to be successful. But it's a partnership between the employer and the workforce.
Also a partnership between the federal, state, and local government. Is the partnership working, and what areas need the most improvement?
Yeah, it really is a partnership all the way around. And part of that goes right back to the education aspects of what we're doing in preparing the workforce. So I believe that employers can be a solution to their own problem of being able to find, attract, and can retain the workforce. It also means that perhaps having some of their workforce being involved in the classroom, whether it's a career and technical education at the high school level, or probably even more appropriately at the college level, at say at the Community College of Rhode Island, where I know that there are companies that have some of their workforce actually involved in teaching some of these classes to make sure that the skills that are needed are really that are being taught that are really relevant. So it is a partnership all the way around.
So bottom line, a degree is often important but not critical. It's the skills, the training, and the ongoing learning that ensures success in the workplace.
Yeah, it's important to think of this. A career, say, in cybersecurity doesn't really require just a 2 or 4 year college degree. You can get your foot in the door with a certificate program. That's really relevant right now for those people that are looking to upskill their abilities. And getting their foot in the door is half the battle in a lot of ways. And right now, you think about kids that are growing up as digital natives, something that perhaps you and I have to learn more and more about computers and technology, where kids are growing up with it that have these intuitive skills in technology. We need to harness that energy, and hopefully it leads to a pathway to a good paying job in a meaningful career.
I can attest to that. Congressman Jim Langevin. He is, of course, the co-chair of the Congressional Career and Technical Education Caucus, a Democrat from Rhode Island. Congressman, we thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
And now a message from our sponsor, Southern Company. Please welcome Michael Schneiderman. He is Public Relations Manager at Alabama Power. In a conversation with Stephanie Cooper, the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability at Alabama Power, a subsidiary of Southern Company. And so, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Schneiderman. I'm the Public Relations Manager for Alabama Power, and we are privileged to be here today with Stephanie Cooper. Stephanie is the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability for Alabama Power, which is a subsidiary of Southern Company. Stephanie is responsible for developing and implementing Alabama Power's sustainability and ESG strategies. She's with me here today to discuss the future of clean energy and what it means for the future of our workforce and our environment. Hi, Stephanie. Great to have you.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be with you today.
Well, let's get started. The word sustainability is thrown around a lot these days, particularly when it comes to clean energy. Stephanie, how is Southern Company internalizing and implementing sustainability practices through operating companies like Alabama Power?
Well, Michael, you're exactly right. The word sustainability is trendy right now, but it's not new to us. Alabama Power was founded on pillars of sustainability more than 100 years ago. And for us, that means people, environment, social responsibility, governance, and innovation. Our business model has always been one that's designed to drive long-term value and equitable opportunity for those we serve. Last year, Alabama Power reported our efforts directly to stakeholders in an inaugural sustainability report. And we're about to release our second report later this month on Earth Day. These reports detail our sustainable business operations that power 1.5 million customers with environmental protections for the planet that we all share, from investing in fiber for a smarter, more resilient and secure grid, to achieving the highest reliability ratings in the industry. We're doing more to impact less. And sustainability flows right from our business strategy into our communities. One of our most successful environmental stewardship efforts is a partnership in the Renew Our Rivers program. It's one of the nation's largest river cleanups. Together, we've removed more than 16 million pounds of trash from rivers and streams in the Southeast.
Okay, so we've defined sustainability, Stephanie. Now let's explore the future of clean energy. What does that look like for Alabama Power from a workplace perspective?
The future energy workforce should be reflective of the diverse communities that we serve. Alabama Power created a Council on Culture and Inclusion in 2018 to further our commitment to a culture where every employee is valued, respected, and appreciated. We recognize that a sustainable business model includes a sustainable workforce. So we invest in our more than 6,000 employees by providing resources to help them better understand the business and empower opportunities. And we're also helping build the diverse and skilled workforce that can propel our state forward. We are partnering with community colleges across the state on line worker training programs that prepare students for jobs in the utility industry, jobs that are in demand right now. Another example is our partnership in an HVAC training center to provide even more students with career-ready skills. We know that education at all levels is an opportunity to pair equity and innovation. So in 2020, we launched the Ed Farm program with Apple to teach coding to educators and students from diverse communities. That success led to a second partnership between the companies to create the Propel Center, a new digital learning hub and business incubator for historically Black college and university students worldwide.
Thanks, Stephanie. I've personally seen how these initiatives are having a real and positive impact. Now I'd like to ask you about Southern Company's new Earth Month campaign, Mother Earth is Hiring. What was the inspiration behind it?
I love this concept. A colleague of mine said, "We don't work for companies, we work for sustainability." The Earth Month LinkedIn campaign, Mother Earth is Hiring, captures a similar sentiment and is a resource for available environmental jobs and volunteer opportunities across the U.S.
And what kind of impact would you like to see from this campaign, Stephanie? What types of conversations are you hoping that it starts?
Well, we hope this campaign will reach and inspire those that want to engage, because the time to act is now. The Mother Earth platform opens the door to those who want to help preserve and protect the planet. We work on behalf of Mother Earth today to provide a better tomorrow for future generations.
Stephanie, on a Southern Company level, there are targets related to carbon reduction and climate change. What's the key to achieving those targets?
Solutions to global issues require intention and collaboration. Southern Company is a leader in the energy industry. We're recognized for innovating solutions. This creates opportunities for engagement across the value chain to advance clean energy and carbon reduction technologies. Southern Company has made significant progress over the past 15 years by reducing greenhouse gas emissions 50%. And there's more to be done as we work to transition our fleet and work towards our 2030 and 2050 targets.
Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing these insights.
From the day you took your first breath, I gave you fresh air and forests to keep it pure. I gave you fertile soil to grow your food and water from my land and skies to quench your thirst. I gave you seas and jungles and plains full of resources and wonder. But things have been changing. I know you can feel it too. We all have a job to do. It's not too late if we work together.
Thank you to Michael Schneiderman and to Stephanie Cooper from Alabama Power. So now it is time for our first poll question of the day. This from our sponsor, Southern Company, and it's Mother Earth is Hiring initiative. So the question, what percentage of your current job positions are driven by sustainability goals? If you say 0 to 24%, select A. B, 25 to 49%. C is 50 to 74%. D is 74 or 75 to 100%. And E, I'm not sure. To answer, visit the pollev.com/thehillevents or use the QR code on the poll slide. Our next guest is Hayden Brown, the chief executive of Upwork, which is a popular platform that connects businesses with freelancers. And my colleague Steve Clemens, contributing editor here at The Hill, speaking with her a short while ago.
Hayden, thank you so much for joining us. I guess the thing that's burning in my mind about the future of work, the future of the workplace, the social contract between workers and their employers is, what if COVID hadn't happened and we hadn't all been driven online into digital space? What would our world look like right now? And where would your company be at this point?
Steve, thanks for having me. I think if we look at where the world was in 2019 and early 2020, a lot of these trends around remote work and around hybrid teams with freelancers on them, they were certainly growing. And there was an appetite for this. Workers were voting with their feet and joining the freelance economy in increasing numbers every year. Companies were struggling more and more with where to go to get the skilled talent they needed, and were turning to new platforms like Upwork and others to find that talent. But certainly what we saw with COVID and this mass experiment with remote work that happened across the US and globally really was a tipping point that unleashed, I think, for people, a massive work awakening around, on the talent side, so many workers realizing that work as they knew it was not working for them. And their whole value system around what they were getting from work, the boundaries around their work, really, they realized as they experimented with working at home and broke the old habits of commuting and built their home offices and all these other things, it really was an experience that I think turned the light bulb on for so many workers around a different value proposition for work, a different risk profile in terms of what they realized they were willing to give and take in order to get different things from their work. And for companies, so many of them figured out that the things that they thought were holding them back from remote work at scale, from having independent talent inside of their workforce at ever larger numbers, it really started to change their thinking in very dramatic ways. And so I'd say what we saw with that was a huge acceleration, obviously, in the remote work trend, which is here to stay. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of what that's going to mean for us. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we will see massive innovations in how work is happening on the backbone of remote work being kind of underneath that. And for the independent talent economy, this is really just beginning to open up, I think, what will be a much bigger set of advancements for companies adopting independent talent in much bigger ways, because this is already a big part of the economy. $1.3 trillion in the US alone of our economy is from independent freelance talent today, and it's growing every year. So it's already become much more mainstream, I think, than people realize. But companies are still trying to figure out how do they fully tap into this workforce, because they are struggling with skills gaps, lack of agility, needing much more different and varied ways of finding these workers. Right. And even with the COVID experiment around remote work, that opened their eyes to what was possible, but it didn't necessarily equip them fully to how to do that. And they're starting to figure that out, I think, in greater numbers. But again, there's a lot more ahead of us that is going to be fascinating in that regard.
Well, look, I'm fascinated by Upwork and the independent talent economy, as you called it, freelancers and others that are out there and have been fighting. And as you said, this was a trend well before COVID hit, but COVID was like a light switch. And, everybody, we do our reaching out to our family, we do our work, everything in the digital space. And so it's really opened up that opportunity. I guess the question is, as you kind of look forward, what kind of counseling do employers get? Because I still hear employers saying, we have to have everyone back. And I'm sitting here, basically in the quiet saying, you're going to lose half your workforce who have other job options in this economy. They like living in Alabama. They don't want to come back to Washington, D.C. I'm just interested in how that's going to unfold. And do you spend a lot of time trying to help employers wise up to the facts?
Yeah, Steve, we absolutely do. I mean, our customers are pioneering in the space, whether it's the independent talent side of our platform who are innovating their careers in incredible ways, or the businesses, which range from 30% of the Fortune 100 to mom and pop shops using Upwork to innovate and work in different ways. We absolutely see this, and we live and breathe it ourselves. We've been a remote work company for 20 years since our founding. And so we really see the opportunities. We understand the pitfalls, and we have lived through that ourselves and with our customers, but we see the opportunities. And I think for those businesses that you're hearing from who are demanding workers come back into the office and are kind of putting on the blinders and saying, this remote work thing, that was in the past and no more. I think you're right that they are really going to struggle to be competitive in a talent market that, as we look at things like the Great Resignation and what is going on around us, talent really want different things. We see already that nearly half of Generation Z coming out of college and establishing their careers are freelancing out of the gate. They want flexibility. They want freedom. They see a career path that looks very different from what their parents and grandparents did for a number of reasons. That includes the values that they have around independence, autonomy, this idea of themselves as entrepreneurs. It also is important to them because they see what happened in previous recessions for their parents, going through 2008 and other things. And they look at that and say, this whole idea of being reliant on a single employer for my whole world and my whole career, and if I get laid off and I'm out in the cold, that doesn't look so great. So my value and my risk calculus looks a lot better if I'm standing on my own 2 feet with a stable of clients who I'm serving. And if one of them goes away, I'm still safe because I've got my other clients in my business that I'm working with. So again, the economy has changed. These workers want different things. And it only takes for any business, one or two of their competitors really pioneering a different way of working with talent for it suddenly to become very hard for them to compete. And we saw what happened, for example, in the financial services industry already with companies like Stripe putting up ads and saying, you know what, you don't want to go back into the office with Goldman Sachs or whoever else, come work for us. So I think we're going to see with this war for talent that it's going to be very competitive, and there's going to be difficulties for companies that really are trying to attract the best talent if they're not willing to be flexible in terms of what that talent can do and where they can work.
Right. And I'm sure you've answered this question a million times, but I think a lot of us, we're very familiar with the kind of old social contract between workers and companies, because that's where you got your 401k. It's where you got dental benefits. It's where you got, various other forms of educational benefits, and you built your savings and health. And so there was a kind of monopoly where the employer had the edge over the employee, and that's often also how unions came about and were empowered within those work environments to protect the interests of employees, because the employment side of it had so much power over all this other pack. Where does all that go in the future heavily freelanced individual talented economy? How do you organize for workers' interests in that arena?
Yeah, and Steve, I think this is where it's very clear that the rules that were written, 70 plus years ago around the social contract, around labor organizations, all those things, they worked for an era of work that has changed radically. And frankly, those things don't work in this new era of work. And the solutions are certainly not to go back and try to force people into full-time work that doesn't work for them, but works for that old model. And the other thing that we see is, for freelancers, for example, working in today's economy, the last thing they want is to go back to a full-time job or stay in a job they hate just to retain medical benefits that they need. So we have to work in today's environment with policymakers to figure out how to evolve the system in the US in particular to really cater to the needs of today's workers who want flexibility, who want autonomy. 44% of the independent talent that we've surveyed are actually earning more as independent talent than they were in a full-time job. More than half of the talent we talk to say there's no amount of money that they could be paid to go back into a full-time job. So this way of working has benefits for the people doing it that are clear and are profound. I talk to talent all the time who have these amazing stories, whether it's spouses of military personnel. They take these jobs with them. They're crafting these lives that just wouldn't work in a traditional full-time employment ecosystem. So we have to evolve, the benefits frameworks and other things in this country to work with a much more flexible way of working, which this freelance economy affords, rather than trying to go back and kind of force fit things into these more archaic models that, we're for another time that we've clearly moved past as a society.
Hayden, I'm also interested in whether there needs to be an evolution in credentialing. A while back, I interviewed the CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, and he said one of the things that was really important to him, this was a few years ago, was finding a way so that those in middle skill jobs, construction jobs, other sorts of things could tell their stories, because they too were out there marketing, and they're also part of that freelance economy. They didn't fit too well in the old LinkedIn, so they added videos and whatnot. But I've been watching and trying to sort of look at how the education system and training system gets disrupted to allow people with these special skills that are developed to begin stacking credentials in a way that are recognized in your industry. Just tell me how Upwork looks at that, whether you're part of the answer there, and what do you think else we need to do in terms of disrupting the training and education credentialing process, which really leaves out a lot of people?
Totally. I think this is where platforms like ours can be a critical part of the solution as we look at credentialing, as we look at the evolution of higher education and the huge problem we have in this country around student loan debt, and the questions that people are asking themselves around, is this degree worth it? And will it pay off for me? So the vantage point that we have on this problem is we run a closed loop system that's essentially a labor marketplace where we can see the inputs and the outputs in an extremely measurable way. So for talent operating on our platform, whether you are in Wheeling, West Virginia, whether you're in Bangor, Maine, you can come on our platform and we can start to measure and tell you, when you add this credential or this degree or showcase this additional portfolio item in our system, this is how much more you can earn. This is how much these skills are actually worth, because we can see the full loop of other talent like you who've added that credential or who have that degree, how much more they earned once they started adding that information onto their profile, how it changed outcomes for them in an extremely exacting way. And so we can tell people up front how much more they can earn, whether it's worth adding that degree or that credential, and create an extremely powerful mechanism to know whether those things are powerful and valuable or whether it's a total waste of time. So our view is to start to develop much more of that visibility for talent up front, so they know where to invest in getting an extra skill, getting an extra credential, learning and upskilling, because at the end of the day, people want to earn money to feed their families, to pursue their pursuits, all of the rest of it. And that's where we feel we can really be valuable to them in giving them that forward visibility way before they've invested the time and energy and money in that next degree or that credential.
Well, listen, Hayden Brown, I always love our discussions. I love looking at your company and all the various things you're doing. You're providing an invaluable service for so many. So Hayden Brown, President and CEO of Upwork, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us how this is going.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Steve Clemens, thank you. And of course, to Hayden Brown, the CEO of Upwork. Nursing services and the restaurant industry, two sectors of the economy that have been most visibly affected by this pandemic. And my next guests have seen a lot unfold since the start of this pandemic 2 years ago. Lisa Dahl is the chef and owner of the Dahl Restaurant Group. She joins us from Sedona, Arizona. And Dr. Ernest Grant, president of the American Nurses Association from Silver Spring, Maryland. And Dr. Grant, I need to begin with you as the husband of somebody who's married to a nurse. I know firsthand the shortage is real and getting worse. Why?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This shortage that we're experiencing now is nothing new. The nursing shortage just got exacerbated, if you will, when COVID came along. But there's a lot of reasons why this particular shortage is so severe. Mainly nurses and other members of the healthcare team are so overworked. They have never worked as long and has been as challenged as they have been over the last 2+ years. And as a result of that, they have suffered not only physically, but also mentally as well. They're just, extremely exhausted. And even though we say that we're resilient, there's still, that need, even though the country is going into, is opening up more, COVID is still there, is still around, and we still have to be aware of the potential of, more, potential outbreaks, as we're hearing about just today. We're not getting much of a reprieve from that, but essentially it's because of, this pandemic that we have been enduring for the last 2+ years.
And Dr. Grant, if I could take that one step further, because while many are going into the medical profession, the bedside nurse seems to be among the biggest problem, the biggest crisis point for hospitals, generally speaking.
Absolutely. There's a number of reasons why that that problem is existing. Mainly, obviously, pay is a big driver of that. We at the ANA have been lobbying Congress for quite some time to to have hazard pay available for people who performed through the last 2+ years. But we also have been, when we have spoken with employers to tell them that in order to retain nurses, they need to increase the salaries. Also, the work environment that nurses are in as well. They need to know that they are in a safe working environment. I hear daily from nurses who are physically and verbally abused by patients families, and even their own colleagues. And again, part of that, I'm sure, is just part of the stress that we've been under for the last 2+ years. But that's still, you didn't sign up to become a nurse to be, physically and verbally abused. You went into the profession to help your fellow man. But, so having a system in place that would know that the employer has your back and that, you are working in a safe work environment is some of the big drivers as to what will keep nurses at the bedside and not have them, looking at opportunities elsewhere.
Let's turn to the hospitality and the restaurant industry. And Lisa Dahl, here on the East Coast, if you go to a restaurant, it's not unusual to see a sign that says, please be patient, we're short-staffed as well. So just how bad of a problem is it in the hospitality restaurant sector, and what are you seeing in Arizona?
Well, we're in a resort town, and it's a little bit different because we're really a microcosm of the larger city demographics. Here we're a town with about 1,200 year-round residents, and yet we have about 4 million tourists a year. So the supply and the demand is completely out of whack. Our tourism is growing, and there's so much demand for travel in the hospitality industry. The hotels are fully booked, the restaurants are fully booked, but we are just at the mercy of staffing. And we try to recruit, but yet we find that housing is such a difficult situation in a small town and in a demographic area like this, that everything seems to be kind of out of balance. And it's hard to know where we're going to find the new talent that we need to keep and sustain the business that we have at hand.
So I have to ask you, why and how has this pandemic made what has been an annual problem, trying to fill jobs, especially during the summer months, far more severe, far more damning right now?
Well, we've always been in a situation in a town like Sedona, Arizona, which is like many other tourist towns. We always have that feast or famine type of situation. Our high seasons are actually the spring and the fall, not actually the summer. Although now that we are in the post-pandemic somewhat, all of the seasons seem to be very high demand. People have been pent up, they're dying to get out. And we just have, in this little town, it's never been easy for labor. There are so many new restaurants, so many new hotels that are coming up all the time. And we're kind of caught up in a situation which is like a vicious cycle. Other businesses basically poach, and they need to supply their restaurants and their hotels. And so we're in a feeding frenzy when it comes to the hourly rates and the salaries. And I don't know how long we can sustain this type of situation where, we can only pay so much and there's only so much talent to go around right now. So it's kind of a scary time for us.
Dr.
But
Grant,
a good time as well, because we're so happy that we're so popular. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, we're desperately looking to bring people in from outside our general area, but everyone else is. And at some point, we need to find a way to find affordable housing and things that we can really bring in the talent and have them find a good place to live for their families.
When it comes to salaries, Dr. Grant, you could be a bedside nurse earning $25 to $35 an hour, working next to a traveling nurse who could be earning $70 to $80 an hour, plus bonuses and plus a housing allowance. So how does that disparity play out in hospitals around the country? And how does that pose a new set of challenges?
Well, the biggest challenge that puts forth is, of course, hospitals need to and long-term care and other facilities that may be using a travel nurse, they need to invest in the nurse who is remaining loyal to their institution. I have nothing against paying a travel nurse what it costs to get them in the door. They are. It's a supply and demand situation. However, obviously, what happens eventually, though, is that someone who has been with an organization long term, they do not see perhaps that investment in them. The employer is not rewarding them for remaining loyal to the institution. So therefore, they perhaps are going to go look at becoming a travel nurse as well. And then all that, institutional knowledge, the huge brain drain that may bring about, could also create chaos within that institution. And of course, it's the consumer who probably is going to be suffering as a result of that, because of when you get a travel nurse that may come in, usually they're doing like a 3-month assignment. They obviously have to meet a certain criteria and standards. So I'm not trying to imply that substandard care would be provided. That's definitely not the case. But you have someone that probably, if they're only going to be there for 3 months, they're just beginning to learn the routine, and then they may take an assignment somewhere else. And what little bit of knowledge they may have gained at that institution, the next institution is going to benefit from it. So what we really need to do, as I stated earlier, we've had conversations with members of Congress, with Department of Health and Human Services. Let's get to the root of what's causing this nursing shortage, of which one is, the pay difference, and pay nurses for what they are worth, and not keep us in as part of the room and board, but actually allow us to be able to charge for what we bring to the table.
Lisa Dahl, as you know, the pandemic has really kind of opened our eyes in terms of how the economy is operating and where there are some gaping holes. What we've seen really in the last 18 months is the supply chain, and I'm curious from your standpoint and from the restaurant industry, how this has led to further disruptions in your sector.
Well, as far as the supply chain, there's no norm anymore. We have a hard time getting almost everything from, of course, our employees that we desperately need, but even the supplies that we need. I'll give you a funny example. Just yesterday, the company that I buy these wonderful French fries for my burger concept could no longer produce them. Somehow they discontinued that product, but that is an everyday norm. So if I had the luxury to sit at my desk and just work on these deficiencies and try to find alternative products and opportunities that would be creative, but I really don't. I actually find that I'm in my kitchens. People ask me every day, "You're not in the kitchen anymore, are you?" And I say, "Oh yes, I'm in the kitchen because I have to be in the kitchen, because training is the new norm." Every day we try to recruit to get new people, but the exhaustive process of training people every day and having trainers to train the new talent, especially when you do realize that the people that used to be paid 14 and 15 as prep cooks are now 25 and even higher. So this is kind of the position that we find ourselves in every day now. It's scrabbling for everything and trying to just get somewhat back to the good old days.
And Dr. Grant, from your position at the American Nurses Association, how is all of this that we've been talking about today, how is it impacting the care that patients are receiving in nursing homes and in hospitals?
Well, one of the big impact, obviously, is the fact that because there is a shortage, then that means that care is possibly going to be put at risk. So every opportunity that we can do or can make to make sure that there is appropriate staffing to cover these shortages. We also have to look at the downside, well, not necessarily the downside, but I mean a nurse being able to have time off from work so that they themselves can recuperate. When you're working, normally when you're used to working 4 days a week or 5 days a week, and now your employer is asking you to work, sometimes 7 days a week, your body can't rebound like that. And as a result of that, you're putting yourself and the patients that you care for at risk. And we can't continue to have a model like this. It's very important that we step back and take a look and assess what's going on, and do whatever we can to get more nurses at the bedside so that you continue to maintain a safe practice environment, not only for the staff but also for the patients that we're providing care for.
So I guess what I hear you saying, Dr. Grant, is that pay is a key component, but not the only component.
Absolutely. When we have talked with nurses, we've done polling. Yes, pay is a very major component, but they mainly want to know too that they are working in a safe environment where, again, as I stated earlier, they're not being physically and verbally abused by patients, families, or even their colleagues, that their employer has their back, and that they have other benefits, which would also make it a prime place that they would want to remain employed at, and that their voices are heard, being there, contributing to, what is going on, have a staffing governance committee or whatever that can offer suggestions for how to make the work environment a better or pleasing environment for nurses as well.
And Lisa Dahl, with a half a minute left, a very quick question for you personally in Sedona, Arizona. How many applicants do you get for every job opening?
Well, nowadays, we see a lot less applicants for the openings. We're doing much better with the front of the house where the servers work on tips. But in terms of the kitchen labor, we don't see as many applicants as we ever did in the past. And it's very dire right now, maybe 3 a day for key positions as chefs and trainers, but we need a lot more. We're used to about 300 employees for my restaurant group. Now we're climbing back to about 260, but we have a new restaurant opening and we really need talent, and we can't open that restaurant without the labor. And right now we're months behind.
Two important areas of the economy: the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, and of course, nursing and medical care. We want to thank both of you. Lisa Dahl is a chef and the owner of the Dahl Restaurant Group in Arizona, and Dr. Ernest Grant. He is the president of the American Nurses Association. To both of you, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, of course, an area where the market is literally bursting with opportunity, the green jobs market, with job postings that have increased 8% over the last 5 years. But like other industries, there's not enough talent to match the demand. And so to talk more about that, I'm joined by Evan Hines. He is the CEO and founder of Climate Base. That is a jobs platform for people and organizations dedicated to fighting climate change and advancing sustainability. And Bhushan Sethi is a joint global leader for people and organization at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Welcome to both of you. Evan Hines, I want to begin with you. First of all, walk us through what type of talent you're looking for in the green jobs market.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Right now we're seeing an incredible growth in climate tech. And when we think about climate jobs at Climate Base, that's really where we're focused. A lot of the sort of green jobs that are talked about right now are primarily jobs working in energy. We hear a lot about solar installation. We hear a lot about the growth of, sustainability as a role, but we view that as kind of just the tip of the iceberg. The organizations that are on climate-based are the organizations that are tasked with scaling the climate solutions that humanity desperately needs. And they need all kinds of people to be joining their teams, from software engineers to salespeople, marketing, lawyers, and so on. So it's really across the entire spectrum of the talent landscape.
And is this a generational issue, Evan Hines, or are we seeing it across all sectors of the economy and all age brackets in this country?
Well, what we're seeing right now is that overwhelmingly young people are prioritizing careers that have a clear impact on the environment, a positive impact on the environment. In fact, I saw a recent study that showed over 50% of millennials surveyed, and this is 2 years ago, so I'm sure the data has already increased. I'm sure this number is even higher for Gen Z, but that over 50% of millennials surveyed reported saying that they would take a pay cut in order to work for an organization that has a strong environmental mission. What's interesting too is that that stat is also surprisingly high for older generations. So we're seeing, I would say, a true revolution, if I may call it, coin it on the spot. The climate work revolution, I think, is something that is really impacting a lot of people. And part of that, I think, is because COVID really spurred the Great Resignation, and it created a space for people to really reflect and think about their careers and really decide if this is what they want to be doing with their lives, whatever it was before. I think as the climate crisis has worsened and continues to be just truly horrific, people are beginning to wake up and say, you know what, maybe there's an opportunity for me to do something in my career and go full in on climate with a 40-hour opportunity to work on climate solutions.
Bhushan Sethi, you look at the numbers at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and as you look at this sector of the economy, geographically, is there a part of the country where it is growing the most?
I think when we look at different sectors, it's definitely relevant in energy, and energy's had to get a head start, as Evan's mentioned, in terms of thinking about alternative fuels. But we see it really in every sector: technology, thinking about the carbon footprint, supply, manufacturing, looking at supply chains that extend beyond the US. So we see it as relevant in every single sector. I think one of the challenges for businesses is, whilst consumers want this, stakeholders want this, many employees, especially that skew younger, want this, there is a disconnect in our society in that when we think about climate and green jobs, it can easily get politicized. So we really need to kind of over-index on the messaging, eliminate the fear, and highlight, as Evan mentioned, there's a breadth of opportunities around different skills, around technology, around environment, around engineering, around other kind of core human skills.
But if you agree with the premise that there are some inequities in the green jobs market, where are they? And how do you address those inequities?
I think they're twofold. One is there seems to be a slight disconnect between businesses and business leaders and employees. So we did a survey last year to talk about the level of investments in climate. 50% of business leaders say they're investing, 30% of their employees are saying that they're investing. So business, and then we've seen this through the pandemic, that business leaders have a slightly different view to their employees. So really needing to kind of message, how are we making investments? How are we changing the way we develop products? How are we making decisions around our supply chain? What are we going to disclose and put in our executives' incentives around that? And relevant for employees, how do we manage the transition? Because you don't automatically learn about solar and wind power and engineering and all of this climate technology. There needs to be a transition plan. There needs to be an investment in skills. And that's where different stakeholders need to come together. So I think that's where, firms that can get on the front foot to kind of manage that with their employees are going to have to focus.
And Mr. Sethi, that also means social responsibility. So what does that mean to you? And what can an employee bring to an employer on that front?
I think we've seen a rise of employee activism. I think we see that employees want to work with firms that are aligned with their own purpose. We see that in the 80s and 90s in terms of percentages. There's a big role for leaders there. A lot of people call this woke leadership. For us, it's just about being compassionate. It's about, as an employer, talking about your social responsibility, making sure that leaders are acting in that way, and we're bringing all stakeholders along. That doesn't mean everyone has to agree with every single thing in the workplace, but it means that we have to have respect and tolerance and talk about the benefits for green jobs, for societies, for business models, for jobs and economic security.
And Evan Hines, I'm curious if you could just spend a moment to tell us your story, because you personally, you faced some obstacles to get where you're at today.
Yeah, so I started Climate Base with my team because I wanted to work in climate. Specifically, as someone who was coming from the startup space, I was hoping to find an opportunity in climate tech. At that time, I was sort of looking for those opportunities. That term, climate tech, was not even commonly used. And over the past 2.5 years, we've been able to help now over 500,000 people find and apply to over 30,000 jobs at over 3,000 organizations that have joined our platform. And I want to be clear that my story is really one that I think resonates with a lot of people, because a lot of people want to go all in on climate and they're wondering, what can I do? How can I do that? Well, working on climate is probably the most effective way of doing it. Actually getting paid to spend your 40 hours a week working on this. And at Climate Base, we've sort of started with answering, I think, the most important question that people are asking, which is, well, what are those jobs and where do they exist? So that's where we've started. But what we've discovered along the way is that it's not just about job discovery, though that is the number one challenge that people report in our surveys. It's also about building a community, building a professional network, since so many people get jobs through people that they know. And it's also around education. In order to really navigate the climate tech and the climate jobs landscape, it does truly help to have a baseline understanding of climate solutions. So that is the challenge that we're focused on addressing at Climate Base is how can we get more people to work on climate?
So the same question to both of you, and Bhushan Sethi, I want to begin with you. At this moment, when it comes to clean, green energy and green jobs, where are we in parlance to the technology to get us there?
I think where, many of the businesses that have to decarbonize there's huge investments, as Evan mentioned, around the technology. But from a people lens, I think we're early in terms of the messaging that unites everyone. But a lot of people still think of this as political and there's some intolerance around that. I think the more that we can kind of create a narrative, the more that we can actually publish some successful stories like Evan's and others, and the more we can get large companies to start disclosing everything around kind of ESG, I think we'll go a lot further.
How do you get to those companies, though?
I think that's where we get to the power of consumers. We get to the power of kind of stakeholder capitalism. We get to measure. We get individual employees to tell their stories around how they're being upskilled, how they're creating opportunities for themselves, and how different firms are supporting that, whether you're financing businesses, whether you're in the tech and data business to report around it, whether you're in the core kind of decarbonization of those business models.
Evan Hines, same question to you. Kind of getting a sense of where are we right now in terms of technology and green jobs? How far have we come? And maybe adding to that the challenges moving forward.
Well, shameless plug, we're preparing to put out our first ever climate-based jobs report. We're going to be breaking down all the over 30,000 jobs that have been posted to our platform by sector, solution, breaking down between emissions reductions versus carbon removal. And so, we're going to have some really compelling data to report on in the very near future. And I would encourage folks to stay tuned and follow along. But I just want to quickly respond to what was said earlier. About climate still being politicized. It unfortunately is a political issue. I want to make that very clear. We subsidize oil and gas to an egregious degree at a time when we really need to be rapidly transitioning away from a fossil fueled economy. And I also want to point out that the majority of young Republicans at this point recognize that human-caused climate change is real, and they want to do something about it. When you look at the oil and gas workforce as well, the majority of them are eager to shift into a different role within renewable energy. So, this notion that we need to be sensitive in terms of the messaging. I mean, I tend to disagree. I think right now we need to strike while the iron is hot, and we need to recognize the fact that overwhelmingly people of all different kinds of political backgrounds recognize that climate change is here and that they want to do something about it.
So Bhushan Sethi, is this a pivot point on what Evan Hines is just alluding to?
I think it has to be. We're obviously going to get temporary shocks like the terrible war in Ukraine is going to impact supply chain and behaviors. We're going to get rising inflation, potentially a recession next year. I totally agree that we need to we need to manage that. What people don't like in this country is being told what to do and what to think. And the more that we as business community and leaders and advisors can kind of support that in our messaging to kind of reduce the polarization, I think that's where we need to focus.
So if you could take us ahead 10 years in 2032, what will this issue look like from your standpoint, from your perspective?
I would hope it would go the way that many of the digital aspects have gone, in that they're embedded as part of business models and the way that we engage, and that we're focused very much on execution and exploration around, alternative business models. I hope so, for the sake of our children and our grandchildren.
And Evan Hines, final question for you. For those looking to move into this sector, it seems what you're saying and what the numbers are indicating, this is a growth area.
Absolutely. And I also just want to, first I'll just say, we've seen the amount of capital going into climate tech, climate solutions more broadly even. We've seen it double year over year for the past 4 years straight. It nearly tripled between 2020 and 2021. And I would predict that it's probably going to quadruple between 2021 and this year. So yes, we are seeing incredible amounts of job growth. And I want to emphasize that, there are opportunities truly for everyone. My message to anyone watching that works in high technology or any real sort of white collar role is that if you care about climate change, you can and you probably should find a way of transitioning into working on climate. And finally, I just want to say that, what Bashan was talking about in regards to people don't like being told what to do. So much of the discourse and the conversation around individual climate action, as in what can individuals do when it comes to having a meaningful impact on climate, so much of the conversation is around our consumptive behaviors. Don't eat this, don't drive this, don't fly too much. It's all these don't statements. And I agree, people don't respond well to that. So I would encourage folks to recognize that the number one most impactful thing that individuals can do is not a don't statement. It is a get paid to work on climate solutions statement. And not only are these jobs abundant and growing and opportunities abound for everyone, but on top of that, they're deeply fulfilling. There's nothing like working on a problem that you deeply care about and going to bed at the end of the day knowing that you've really made a real difference.
Two very important points and perspectives. My thanks to you, Evan Hines, the CEO and founder. The organization is called Climate Base, and Bhushan Sethi. He is the joint global leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers. To both of you, appreciate you being with us.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
And now another poll question. Remote work led roughly 5 million Americans to move to a new location in the past 2 years. So for you, will you continue to work remotely permanently? So the answer choices are as follows. A, yes, I would prefer to work remotely. B, no, I've returned to the office or plan to, or my role cannot be performed remotely. C, I would prefer flexible roles that would allow me to work from home when needed. To answer A, B, or C, visit the poll at ev.com/thehillevents or use the QR code on the poll slide at the bottom of the screen. We'll be announcing our poll results at the end of our program. My next guest is Congressman Dave Schweikert from Arizona. He is a senior member of the Joint Economic Committee. He thinks the economic recovery is falling short, especially on the jobs front. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's talk about jobs. We also have to talk about inflation, the new numbers that came out today, and whether or not that is further exacerbating the job market that we're seeing today and what you're seeing on the front lines in Arizona.
And look, and my comments in regards to jobs is more the differential of actual purchasing power. When you realize even some of the posting from March was 8.5% inflation annualized, but then you take a look at many of our submarkets. I mean, Arizona, year over year, the January to January number was 10.9% in the Scottsdale, Phoenix area. So we saw some decent wage gains. Some of the job creations were paying well, but an individual in that job was poor by the end of the year. And my fear is that is actually what sets off the expectation of recession by third, fourth quarter or beginning of next year, is that loss of purchasing power. So it is sort of the nature of what could you and I do from a policy standpoint, other than the Federal Reserve squeezing liquidity out of the markets? What could you and I do that boosts jobs and availability and productivity, but also has a dampening effect on inflation? And that's why my personal fixation has been, what do we do tax code regulatory wise to move investments? It's almost like your last segment, into highly productive uses of capital that could hit the market quickly.
So what needs to be done in the short term? And in a right now, with Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, your message to the Democrats is what?
Part of me first wants to say, when even some of the leading Democratic economists a year ago were begging them, do not throw more kerosene and matches onto the kindling that the Fed had left us. And maybe that's already been litigated enough. So now if I came to my Democrat colleagues and said, what can we do immediately? There's some quirky ideas, but they are economically somewhat sound. Could you take middle-class individuals and say, if you have some cash in the bank, we're going to give a special spiff. It only exists for the next 6 months to put money into a retirement account. We'll let you use after-tax money, and we'll treat it like an IRA or Roth, because that way you pull liquidity out. On the other side of the ledger, could you do sort of a depreciation kicker, sort of the expensing we did after the 2017 tax reform, to businesses saying, if you'll set aside capital and immediately put that into items, plant and equipment, software that make you more productive. Because if inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, you can do two things. You could use some fiscal policy, not monetary, fiscal, to withdraw some cash out of the system, but put it into places that help people's retirement futures, economic futures. And the other side is some incentives to move to productivity, make more stuff, provide more services. And I think some of that could happen quickly. But it would require a lot of our Democrat colleagues to admit that their fiscal policy from last year was the match that set off the kindling.
Congressman Schweikert, inflation is high across the country, average 8-9%, but it's even higher in Arizona. Why?
In some ways, you've actually been partially covering some of this today. Your poll question, if I get to choose where I work, wouldn't you love to work in the Phoenix Scottsdale area? Look behind me. It's the lifestyle is wonderful. The political climate is, from a tax and policy standpoint, is easy to have a small business. So it helps set off some real movement in our real estate prices. So if you look at the differential, why did the Phoenix area have such a high inflation rate? It was housing and our fuel costs. That was where the real differential was.
So what worries you the most as you look at where we're heading this year with inflation now in some parts of the country in the double digits? And we've been talking the last couple of hours about what is a growing labor shortage. Employers just having a very difficult time trying to fill those positions.
What worries me the most is actually a bifurcation in society. The working poor are actually getting poorer almost every day. I think there's a misunderstanding of how crushing inflation is to people, to individuals, to families, where a lot of your income goes to that housing piece, that fuel piece, fuel piece. And for folks who are in the upper middle class and higher up, if you own assets, inflation hurts, but most of your house, your other assets sort of move along with inflation. So you're not falling poor. And if inflation continues, we're going to start to see some really uncomfortable numbers on a big segment of our retirement repopulation that their savings are becoming devalued. So that's one of my worries there. On employment, there was actually some interesting little factoids in last week's employment numbers. We've talked about the Great Resignation, which I've never been completely comfortable with that as a title or definition. But we saw some inklings of those who chose to retire early coming back into the labor market. Mm-hmm. Now, is that because they're seeing their purchasing power being eroded, or because there's such a demand for their talents and labor? So that's another thing Republican Democrats could be doing, is how do you very aggressively encourage older workers saying, we need you, we want you? How do you also then, the really one that's befuddled many of us is young males. How do you get them to actually enter into the labor market? Because they're substantially underperforming. So you have this sort of tails of the curve, and there are some policy suggestions that actually might encourage those populations to participate.
And Congressman Schweikert, I should attest you can bring some of that Arizona sunshine here east, because we've had a wet spring thus far. I want to ask you a final question and frame it in economic terms. You are a member of the Joint Economic Committee, but it clearly has become a political debate. Some of the states, New York and California, that basically shut down and been slow to reopen, have seen a different level of economic activity than, say, Arizona and Florida. From an economic standpoint, not a political standpoint, can you address that?
I want to make sure I'm not sounding sort of rhetorical, because some of the actual research is going to take years. Mm-hmm. How much of that was capital moving to places where it had a place to go? How much of that was talent picking up and moving? How much of it was just people with children wanting to be in a place where their kids actually weren't sitting behind a laptop? So there's no questions that there's lots of inputs on why states like Florida, Texas, Arizona have seen a fairly healthy demographic economic movement, where states that were very aggressive in their shutdowns actually see more than just the economic movement. I'm going to be fascinated when we start to see what are the mental health, what are the long-term capital investments, a lot of the other precursors to a stable economic growth. And we don't have all that information yet. We just sort of have the top line migration and investment numbers.
And that really is one of the fascinating aspects of what we have been living through over the last 2 years, and so much to study as we move forward. Congressman David Schweikert, he's joining us from beautiful Arizona, a member of the Joint Economic Committee in Congress, also the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So here's a quick message from our sponsor, Southern Company, and its initiative, Mother Earth is Hiring.
From the day you took your first breath, I gave you fresh air and forests to keep it pure. I gave you fertile soil to grow your food and water from my land and skies to quench your thirst. I gave you seas and jungles and plains full of resources and wonder. But things have been changing. I know you can feel it too. We all have a job to do. It's not too late if we work together.
We want to continue our conversation on the economy and what we're seeing in the workforce. My next guest sees the U.S. labor market through the lens of the data found in the monthly jobs report put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Dr. Erica Groshin is the former commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Currently, she serves as a senior economics advisor at Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. She is also a research fellow at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Dr. Groshin, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So if you could, at the top line, give us a sense of what the labor market from your standpoint looks like right now, and then what you think it will look like a year or two from now.
Great. Well, I'd say that, let me step back and say how things developed since the depths of the pandemic, right? Up until the last few months, the job growth that we've been seeing, which has been quite strong, has been really reflecting a large number of temporary layoffs that we saw during the pandemic itself, right? And so most of the job growth that we had, which was pretty strong, was really recalling people to jobs that they had held before, right? And that was important, and it really got us back on track. A few industries are still down, notably childcare, leisure, and hospitality in particular. But going forward, most of the job growth that we're going to see is really going to reflect a changed economy, structural changes that are more long-lived. And some of these were underway before, but some of them are changes that are really being caused by the pandemic, geopolitical concern, climate changes, things like that. So we have a tighter labor market that has replaced most of the pandemic jobs that were lost, not quite all, but most of those. And now we're seeing a labor market that's pretty tight by conventional standards, that is about to absorb more structural changes than we were picking up before.
So as you look at that, what areas are the tightest? What are among the hardest sectors to fill? We talked about the nursing shortage earlier. We've talked about the hospitality industry. Where would you point to?
Well, by and large, where we see most of the tightness is actually in lower paid jobs. So that's not nurses, but generally speaking, it's in the jobs that mostly are going to workers without a college degree. Because really, the jobs where people had high degrees have high earnings or skilled jobs, those were much less disrupted during the pandemic than the ones that were delivered in person, which were primarily, not entirely, but primarily people who don't have a college degree.
And so has this pandemic, and I think the answer is yes, really kind of reshaped how we look at the workforce? But as you look at the numbers and the demographics, what alarms you the most?
Well, actually, let me take a step back and say the good thing, where we really do expect jobs to be changing, are jobs that are adjusting to the fact that more people are working from home. So maybe leisure and hospitality work moving from central business districts to more residential areas, or even outside of the big cities. We will see more remote healthcare, education, and shopping, and less travel for the foreseeable future. More jobs associated with supply chains management, but also local suppliers, inventory, warehouse jobs, vertical farming, local manufacturing, sustainable energy, things like that. But when you ask me what alarms me, what worries me, is that for the past 40 years, we've had growing problematic outcomes in our labor market. We've had 40 years of rising inequality, real wage stagnation, that is buying power stagnation for the median worker, which is someone without a college degree, declining mobility for those families, for those people. Those are the alarming things. And with this growth that we're seeing now, I think the big question is, can we change things so that this growth doesn't add more to our problems, but helps to address them?
And as you well know, one of those areas of great concern can be found on a college campuses. You're part of Cornell University, the support staff that really runs these schools, these universities, they're facing a severe shortage.
Right. And there are things that we can do to alleviate those shortages that will also help these problematic outcomes, right? Right now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that most of the job growth, 3/4 of job growth going forward, will be in occupations that these days are being, when they're posted, the employers say they require a college degree. And yet 2/3 of our workforce does not have a college degree. So we need to address that imbalance, right? And one of the ways to address that imbalance is to more actively take advantage of the skills that people have developed through alternative routes, not through going to college, but while they were on the job. All right. And if you look at the workforce that way, we have 71 million experienced people out there who are successfully in jobs now that could move up using the skills they've developed. But right now, the employers don't know how to look for them and don't know how to find them. And that's a challenge for the employers, for the employees, and for our economy as a whole.
But as
we're
you
not
know,
using their full potential. Yes.
There is another imbalance. So if you want to work in retail, leisure, entertainment, restaurant industry, if you're in medical care, you've got to be on the front lines. You've got to be at the workplace. And as we're asking the poll question, so many Americans say, I want to work from home. So how do you address that imbalance or inequity because of the very nature of the jobs that they may or may not be applying for?
Well, I think you have to figure out how to make those jobs safer. If you're going to be in person, how do you make them safe in the pandemic? How do you get the pandemic under control so it's less of a concern? And how, in the face of another spike, how do you make sure that the people who are doing those jobs can do them safely? And that's a focus that, thank goodness, we haven't had pandemics recently, in recent history before this. It's learning on the part of the employers and the employees how to make things safe. And it's also possible that some things that we have been delivering in person up to now can be done more from home than we thought. Who would have thought that we would have as much takeout food, healthcare delivery, over the phone, even education. Not all education has worked well remotely, but much more has than probably we thought could have been done before. So it's a combination, I think, of getting more things being done remotely, and that requires broadband access, et cetera, but also finding out what works remote and how to deliver that well, and keeping people safe who have to be there in person.
So to that point, this is a broad brush question, but generally speaking, are employers getting it for those employers that require the workers to be in the restaurant, in the hospital, in the workforce, in person?
Are they getting it? I guess I don't know yet. Right? It's a learning process. We're building this plane as we're flying, right? So this is a time where data is really critical so that employees can make the right decisions. We need to make sure that our data infrastructure is adequate to answer people's questions so that we don't fly blind, so that we have the information that we need to make good decisions all around. And that's also a place that policy can be helpful. We can beef up our statistical agencies, and we can beef up our capacity to test the effectiveness of policies and programs that are intended to help. Are they helping? Are they not helping? What things could change to make them more effective? So it's the employers want to do this right. Employees want to make the right decisions. Policymakers want to get it right. How do we inform them quickly and effectively about what works and what doesn't? And that's one of our biggest challenges right now, I think, is making sure that we have this information infrastructure so that everybody can make the good choices.
Dr. Groshin, thank you for adding your perspective as a labor economist. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. Great program.
And now, two polling questions back to back. The first one is from our sponsor, Southern Company, and its initiative, Mother Earth is Hiring. What organizational changes has your company made to achieve a more sustainable future? And then the final poll question, aside from compensation, which of the following is most important to you in evaluating a new role? A, the company culture and its inclusion practices, something that we've been talking about today. B, is the company family friendly? C, is the company's social and or environmental impact of the role? And D, the flexibility in the work locations as well as the hours? To answer, visit pollev.com/The Hill events or use the QR code at the poll slide at the bottom on the screen. My next guest sees the final panel, I should say, is a deep dive looking at youth college students and mothers' outlook for employment. We're going to be talking about all of that. Beverly Scott is the founder of Introducing Youth to American Infrastructure, a not-for-profit that recruits young folks for infrastructure jobs. We're also joined by Madeline Pumaregia. She is the president of Miami-Dade College, joining us from South Florida. And Emily Martin is the vice president for education and workplace justice at the National Women's Law Center. We welcome all of you. And Emily Martin, I want to begin with you. The disparity between men and women in the workforce and what we've seen during this pandemic, how it's impacted women perhaps more so than men.
Well, great to be here. Thank you for having me. This pandemic and the economic dislocations it caused is really the first time where we saw a recession where women lost more jobs than men. Obviously, at this point, unemployment rates are down. There's been a lot of labor force reentry, but even still, women are short more than 1 million jobs compared to February 2020. So 70% of the net jobs that have been lost over the course of the pandemic are women's jobs. And there are still close to 1 million fewer women in the labor force now than in February 2020, meaning they're no longer working or looking for work. Well, by comparison, there's about 500,000 more men in the labor force now than in February 2020. So it starts to show the very gendered impact of the pandemic, both on the occupations that it hit the hardest, which tended to be the low-wage service jobs where women are overrepresented, but also the caregiving dislocations as schools closed or went remote, as childcare went in and out of quarantine. Women tended to be the one to fill those family caregiving gaps, and that has really shown up in women's labor force participation and still is definitely lingering, even as by many measures, we're coming out of the COVID jobs crisis.
President Pumaregia, let me begin with you by talking about the college campuses, and you really, as the president of a community college, on the front lines of all of this. What have you been seeing over the last 2 years since the start of this pandemic? And more significantly, what tools do you need to train workers to leave the community college at Miami-Dade or elsewhere and get into the workforce?
That's a great question. And I think what's happened over a 2-year period, initially we saw so much of an exodus leaving the community college space because our students traditionally work while they study. They're often in the sandwich generation, either taking care of a child or taking care of an aging parent, and because of safety reasons also had to leave. But what we've done over the last year is really introduce new modalities in terms of being able to take courses virtually, not just online self-paced, which I think align well. But in Miami, the tech ecosystem has really just picked up momentum, a lot of tech jobs available. So we have aligned ourselves to companies that are hiring, making sure that we've got curriculum alignment, providing students the opportunity for paid internships, and being able to stack credentials. We may not see where every student wants to come back now for just the traditional associates, but they do to earn a college credit certificate. Or if you take cybersecurity, where they can get a certification that leads right into the associates and into a bachelor's. And so we've developed a cadre of rapid response credentials, helping students come back in, earn that credential, and pivot to the workforce while they continue their education. And we're seeing a lot of our enrollment regained in those kinds of workforce programs.
But where are you seeing the biggest growth in terms of the skills and training at Miami-Dade?
So I would say 3 areas: technology, cybersecurity, program has certainly tripled in capacity and growth. Our artificial intelligence is another space. And then I will tell you that healthcare, while we are seeing that nurses are leaving, we're also seeing a lot wanting to enter into the workforce. Certified nursing assistant, LPNs into the RN is another space where there's a lot of interest for students coming back in, and where there's jobs and skills that we're aligning to those jobs.
Beverly Scott, you're the founder of Introducing Youth to American Infrastructure. And so let me ask you about what your organization is doing to entice younger people to have the skills that they need. And do we have the infrastructure to train them appropriately?
You know, I'm glad you asked that. I really started, this was before the pandemic happened. I've been in the infrastructure sector, fell into it 40 years ago. And I always tell people, they say, oh, how did you, I've been teaching. And I said, well, let me tell you, you should ask me why I stayed. And that's because I've been in the business of community building for 40 plus years and been blessed to do so. So in IA, and that's Introducing Youth to American Infrastructure, Inc., I took the approach. I've been the transport sector for 40 years and then had opportunity to do broader in infrastructure over the last 10 years. And I was sitting listening to all my counterparts in the other sectors, water, energy, telecom, whatever. They were saying the same thing that well, where are the people? Well, where are the kids? The next gen doesn't know about it. We won't even talk about the persistent diversity issues in terms of women as well as people of color across these critical infrastructure sectors. Infrastructure, people, it's a career awareness. For the first thing, most folks, grown people, don't know what infrastructure encompasses. We have 16 critical infrastructure sectors in this country, and most folks couldn't even begin to rattle what they are. So the notion that just because you're in a STEAM or a STEM program, which is kind of where we kind of put this stuff, that somehow the magic of what you get to work on, when you start talking to young people and you're talking about community building, which is what infrastructure is all about. It's about outcomes that are driven for people, communities, and society. Clean air. If you're interested in gentrification, who do you think is the one that's handling that stuff? Who gets a park? Who gets a tree? Who gets a bike path? Whether you have clean water or not. This is the work of the infrastructure sectors. In fact, I was privileged to be part of a national report on this. And I was talking to a gentleman in Crystal, Minnesota, and asked him, he was over public works there. And this was right in the height of the pandemic. And I asked him, I said, when you go to talk to young people, what do you say to them to interest them in these positions? He said, do you know what I say, Dr. Scotty? And you could have heard a pin drop. He said, we're the people who make normal happen. And that is literally the work of the infrastructure sectors. And when you make those connections for young people, then they get it. They begin to get it. And literally, it becomes a lifetime opportunity for them to be able to give back to their community. So I think in light of some of the comments I heard earlier, we have overspec many of the jobs making. I want people to get every degree you can get, but we need to be thinking about continuous learning. There are no inoculations for life. K to gray, exactly what Dr. Madeline was just saying about we got to retool ourselves. We have to have from the cradle to the grave, opportunities, flexibility. We need to stop siloing. We need to think about stackable credentials, portability, expanded career paths, learned experience. We're keeping your toolkit sharp for your entire life. And so a K to gray continuum of traditional education and career readiness preparation, which requires, this is an all in. This is families, this is community, this is public, this is private, this is nonprofit. This is not the employers who need to sit over there and figure it out. This is all of us together because we're talking about a totally different world of people readiness for the 21st century.
But
so,
Beverly Scott,
I could preach on this until the cows come home, so stop me.
Well, I just very quickly, is there a disparity between what you might see in the Northeast or Midwest versus what you might see in a state like Florida and at the campus of Miami-Dade in terms of the infrastructure in place to help these students?
Do you know what the issues I'm talking about are endemic to us across the board. Now, the issues that you have in terms of the lack of infrastructure in some areas, I wouldn't necessarily count out Miami-Dade, but when we're looking about, it's come up before, this digital divide that we know we have had for the last 25, 30-year period of time, which is hitting rural communities, the areas of the South, and the areas where we just have infrastructure deficits, is riveting. But to tell you this rethinking, don't believe that anybody is doing something, and there are great examples across this country of folks who are doing tremendous work. But to say that we have really had a national mobilization around the need to, as was said already, we've had a lot of quick response things, and we have all needed to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time. But to say that we have really holistically looked at this is a different world. We are, and it is even emerging totally differently in terms of space, allocation of space, what people think they want to do, burnout, how you design things. This is major. And no, this is not isolated to one pocket of anything. And quite candidly, we're not the only people globally folks are having to deal with this. But I'm going to deal with my place right now, which is the US. And we have a tremendous opportunity, but we got to step out of our silos, step out of pointing fingers at whose issue it is. It is all of us collectively and together. And I think that where we have the challenges, we also are at a moment of tremendous opportunity to be able to write a new normal that is a just normal, and that also begins to really fundamentally and systemically address issues of divides, lack of diversity, lack of opportunity, and that's the opportunity that we have in front of us. So this is not little dribbles here or little dribbles there. We really need to rewrite the script, okay? And in that, I think there's just tremendous opportunity for us to really be able to do some big, bold, needed things that will also drive policy. We need to fund people readiness like we mean it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's good stuff that's taking place. But like I said, this is as much as it is about, somebody told me one time, long time ago, the mark of a real leader is not just what you leave behind, but doggone it, it's who you leave behind.
So, Madam President, let me go back to what Beverly was talking about in terms of getting out of your silos and best practices. One of the areas that people point to at Miami-Dade is the partnership that you have with the city of Miami and with the state in terms of trying to train the next generation. So if you could, in terms of lessons learned and perhaps applying to other community colleges across the country, what are they?
I think there's a couple of areas there. Talent is the economic driver for any state and any community. Really, if you don't have the talented workforce, it's not going to let you grow businesses or attract businesses. So I think one of the things that's important is program alignment. Sometimes we're just offering programs and, you're trying to advertise more for a program that doesn't have enrollment. It just doesn't have alignment to where the jobs are. So I think one of the things I'd like to reverse the question, not so much lessons learned, like I would say, laying out a talent management strategy for the state. It starts there. For Florida, it's wanting to be number one in workforce, which is to ensure that 25 to 64-year-olds have the credential of value that they need to get into a job. And so I think that at the state level, the right investments in not just traditional financial aid programs, but like in Florida, we've invested in open door grants, which allow those programs that traditionally aren't eligible for federal aid to be able to have a tuition reimbursement program, so we can get more short-term program and certification in for individuals. I think the third aspect of it is you need business at the table. in terms of not only just paid internships, but opportunities for apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. We've done one in automotive technician. It's traditional if you think about it with an apprenticeship program, but it's Tesla and Bean Automotive. But we're now doing one with banking. Well, what bankers came and said, look, we need commercial lending and not in the traditional MBA. So we're doing an apprentice program there by having industry at the table. And then I think city, the relationship that we have with the city and the ecosystem of talent, school district, ourselves, the mayor, in making sure that the city and county also invested in workforce training to upskill existing employees. We can talk about attracting new students into new career paths, but I think we also, as part of talent management strategy, have to talk about upskilling, especially in those large employers in the community, so that people don't find themselves out of a job and can upskill while they're there. There's no doubt that the pandemic accelerated innovation and technology. It accelerated some automation, but it also brought forward a lot of other new jobs, especially in the tech field, that are not the computer science vertical, that can be from analytics to, as I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity, AI, digital marketing. So all of those aspects. And then the last one I would say is, don't forget your own people inside. We did faculty trainings during the fall. 500 of our faculty were trained in artificial intelligence, in using pedagogy and technology to advance and close equity gaps. So I think also thinking about creating a culture of care within and upskilling your own talented workforce.
Emily Martin, I want to jump in from your perch as the Vice President of the National Women's Law Center. One of the very real disparities we've seen in an area that doesn't get a lot of attention, those minority women and also those women with disabilities. So how has all of this impacted that sector of these demographics?
Women of color and women with disabilities definitely have experienced higher unemployment rates throughout the pandemic and have been slower to return to normal. And that's in part because women of color, women with disabilities are overrepresented in low-paid jobs. Our polling at the National Women's Law Center shows that that in general, women are much more likely than men to say that they are financially worse off post-pandemic, with women in low-paid jobs being especially likely to say so. About a third of men say they are better off financially than they were before the pandemic, but only 15% of women say so. And one of the things that speaks to, I think, looping back to all of Dr. Scott's inspiring statements about building an infrastructure for the future, is ensuring that that infrastructure includes a caregiving infrastructure, because that is part of getting back to normal for women, especially for Black women and Latinas, who are more likely to be breadwinners for their families. It is part of ensuring that the dislocations of this pandemic don't carry forward for years and continue to hit families' paychecks. Women and men both say they took on more family caregiving responsibilities during the pandemic, but women are much more likely to say it, with women in low-paid jobs and moms with kids under 5 being overwhelmingly likely to say that. So ensuring that we have real investments in childcare, in home care, in elder care, and that those care jobs are themselves high quality jobs that pay a decent living so that people can make careers out of that work, that is important both for the care workers and for the many, many families, workers, disproportionately women, who depend on those care workers in order to succeed on the job themselves. And I think that's part of the way back to normalcy for all women post-pandemic.
3 very important voices from the National Women's Law Center, the president of Miami-Dade College and the founder of the organization introducing youth to American infrastructure. To all of you, thank you for adding your voice and your perspective to this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My final guest is Patrick Harker. He is the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. I spoke with him recently and began the discussion talking about a record inflation rate as we are witnessing and its impact on the jobs. Let's listen. President Harker, thank you for being with us. As you well know, we're seeing record low unemployment, among the fastest growing job market we've seen in decades. And we are now coming off what many are calling the Great Resignation, but also dealing with record high inflation, among the highest in 40 years. So bottom line, where does that put the U.S. economy now and moving forward through 2022?
Well, thanks for having me, Steve, today. And if I look at the economy, absent inflation, which is clearly an issue that we need to address, and we are in the process of addressing that, to the extent we can. I mean, some of the things like supply chain disruptions are outside really what the Fed can do. The economy is strong. You just mentioned a very strong labor market, strong GDP growth, and we're seeing lots of good signs. So what we don't want to do is, ruin the good things by being too aggressive in terms of inflation. But we need to take action, but we need to be careful at the same time. So I think things are good, but think back before the pandemic. I know it's hard for us to think back before the pandemic, but we had very tight labor markets then. So there are some structural issues we need to address in our society, in our economy, to solve these problems, to get the people back to work that we need for this economy to thrive.
And so you say take action, structural changes. Specifically, what are they? What can the Fed do? What needs to be done?
So in terms of inflation, we're taking action with respect to raising the Fed funds rate, the interest rates, and also reducing our balance sheet, which also removes monetary accommodation. And that's really what the Fed can do through monetary policy. But what we have in the labor market in terms of these tight labor markets, as I said, that was true before the pandemic hit. There are things we're doing through our community development function all throughout the Fed, but particularly in Philadelphia, to try to address this. Because we need to really focus on creating an equitable workforce recovery. I mean, it's real simple. We need to get people off the sidelines into good paying jobs. It's good for them, it's good for their families, it's good for their communities, and we need them as part of this economy.
From your standpoint, what did we learn during this pandemic in terms of the job market and really what we're dealing with today, which is in many sectors, a labor shortage?
Yeah, I think if I were to summarize it in one word, it's hope, in the sense that people need a sense of momentum. They need hope that there's a better future. There's a better future for themselves and for their families. And I think what we saw in this job market right now is if people had the opportunity to leave a job that didn't fit them, where they didn't see opportunities for growth, they did, because there are so many openings. But in order to make your way through this job market to better and better jobs, you need skills. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to I need the skills. Those skills need to be matched with what the employers want. There are talented people all across our country, really talented people. And I think what we need to focus on is connecting them to opportunities to get the skills to leverage what they already know and to enhance what they know so they can improve their life and their families' lives.
So skills, but perhaps in many cases, not necessarily a college degree, correct?
Right. Yeah, so this is a little strange for me to say. I'm an old university president, right? Not everybody needs to go to college or needs to go to college right away. People need skills, and we have to recognize that people learn in different ways. Not everybody learns in exactly the same way. Not everybody learns by sitting in a classroom and learning. Many people learn by doing. And so we need to really have the diversity of approaches to helping people get those skills. And in the case of a college degree, for some people that makes perfect sense, but it doesn't make sense for everybody. We need a very diverse workforce in this very diverse economy. And so we should celebrate those jobs where you don't have a college degree, but that provide a middle-class living for your family and for those in your community.
So when you hear the term equitable workforce, What comes to mind? How does that look?
So people who want to make a move, people who want to get a better job, have the opportunity to do so. I think it's really simple, right? In that the barriers to that, whether they're racism in some cases or lack of opportunity because it's not in your neighborhood or you just never saw it in your family, you don't understand that those opportunities are there. There's lots of things that hold people back from being able to get the job that they would like and that would make their lives better. That's what I mean by equitable. Everybody has an opportunity to be what they want to be.
As you know, there are so many areas, especially in the service sector, that have seen huge labor shortages. Why is that, and what can be done about that?
Well, if you step back for a minute and look at economic growth is both productivity growth plus the growth of the labor market. And productivity growth through this pandemic has ticked up some as people automated more because they couldn't find the workers. But in terms of getting more people into the labor force, there's only two ways to do that. One is to, again, get people off the sidelines who are not currently participating. And I think that's what we're seeing right now is people just stop participating in some of these jobs, particularly in the service sector. And this is something I have to be very careful saying because it's not in our wheelhouse. It's not in our policy at the Fed to do anything about this. But we also need a sensible immigration policy so that people can get those jobs. I think right now, my district, we have a lot of beaches, New Jersey, Delaware beaches. I've been talking to my contacts right now. They're very afraid of this summer and not having the workers. And so people are being creative about how to get workers. But, you know, they've really relied for years on bringing people in temporary visas to work in the resorts. It's not clear how that's going to work this year. And that's why they're concerned.
Outside of tourism and the restaurant and entertainment sector, what else are you seeing in the greater Philadelphia area in terms of the economy and really the outlook for the rest of this year and into 2023?
So again, Philadelphia as a region doesn't have the highs of the economy that we see nationally or the lows. We tend to be right in the middle. And so we're a good barometer for, I think, where the economy is going. What we see is continued growth, but we see incredibly tight labor markets. And tight labor markets in areas, we were just talking about hospitality, tourism, but also with the booming business here in the Philadelphia region of cell and gene therapy, really being led by the research out of the universities here. We need lab techs. We don't just need PhDs, but we need people that can work in the laboratories, people who can work in clinical settings. I mean, the shortage of nurses is profound in this region and all across the country. So field after field, you can see the shortage and how important it is for us to really focus on getting people into the labor market with the skills that will make them successful.
The other uncertainty, as you well know, is this pandemic. We're now in a new phase as most Americans have at least had one vaccine, at least half of the country with the second booster shot. But how does that uncertainty add to where we are economically?
Oh, I mean, this whole recession that we went into was driven by the pandemic. I mean, this is why historical precedent isn't exactly something we can rely on when we look at coming out of this recession. This one is different because of the pandemic. And, you know, years ago or 2 years ago, when people were asking what letter would the recovery be, remember this? Would be a V, a W? I said it was going to be a Nike swoosh, but a bumpy Nike swoosh. We were going to climb out, but it was going to be bumpy. And we're still in that bumpy situation. I mean, things are opening and closing, but hopefully we've seen the worst of it here, at least in the US. But globally, there's still challenges. But at least in the US, I'm hoping that we can reopen. We're coming back to work at the Fed in terms of bringing people back into the building. We're seeing that all across the city. And that's good because the deli operator or the dry cleaner needs us working in the city.
But in terms of the tools that you have, what more potentially could be done?
Good question. So we've been doing work with our colleagues at the Cleveland Fed now for a while in what we call opportunity occupations, jobs that pay above the median wage, but don't necessarily require a college degree. We know what they are. We've documented this very clearly. And we know what skills are needed for people to get those jobs. So we've looked at all sorts of research, and we've actually built a tool called the Occupational Mobility Explorer, where people can go in and say, here's where I am right now. With a little bit of training, what job could I get? And what would be my bump in salary? And actually, it lets you do a couple more steps. And if I got that one, what's the next move? And then if I got that one, what's the next move? This tool is very powerful. We want people, either individually or policymakers, nonprofit leaders, to really use it to help focus. And by the way, it's not just a national tool, it's broken down by region. So you can look at the Philadelphia region and see exactly what those opportunity occupations are. We think this is a powerful tool to help people get the jobs that they need and we need them to have for this economy to grow.
How worried are you about gas prices now well over $4 a gallon and what seems to be record high housing and rental prices across the country?
Yeah, of course, this disproportionately hits the low to moderate income families. And yeah, I'm very worried about that. So to the extent that we can do something about the Fed, that is to start to bring inflation down, we need to do it. And we're taking action, and I'm very supportive of that action. The supply chain disruptions, unfortunately, are more difficult to deal with. We see with China closing down some of their economy because of the COVID-19 outbreaks. They're more difficult to deal with. We have to soldier our way through this, and we will. Our forecast is inflation will remain high this year, but in out years in 2023, 2024, we should get back to the 2% goal that we have at the Fed.
And so bottom line, your recommendation to the employer and the employee looking for jobs and looking for employers is what?
So for employers, it's think skills, not necessarily credentials always. And think of employees as an asset and not as a cost. And so really start to invest. And we're seeing that. I'll give you one quick example. There's a resort up in the Pocono region that realizes that we were talking about housing, that the workers, the temporary workers they need this summer can't afford the housing. They're building housing for them. We're going back to the old days of worker housing. That's a creative thing to do. And so employers, be creative. For employees, have hope. Think of what you want to do and then use the tools like we have, the Occupational Mobility Explorer, or other tools, or just word of mouth. How can I get the skills I need to get that better paying job? There's a lot of help out there. And so just encouraging people, don't give up. You can make this move effectively for you and for your families.
So final question, from your perspective, are we at a turning point in this 21st century economy?
Well, we've been in a turning point for a while. I think there's been a continual shift as we move toward more service-based economy over many decades. I think right now, though, what's happened is technology has accelerated throughout many sectors of the economy, and COVID it was the impetus for that acceleration of the deployment of technology. That puts even more premium on getting skills. It used to be just hard work and a strong back got you far in life. Well, you need some skills now. And so that's why we're really pushing through the work we do in our community development function, skill-based hiring and more skill acquisition for our workforce.
President Harker from the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia, we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And that brings an end to our program. As promised, here's a look at the results of the polls. And by the way, thank you so much for your many responses. As we look at the numbers, the first question is, what percentage of your current job position driven by the goal of sustainability? From 0 to 24, 32%, and those not sure also at 32%. The rest broken down in the teens, 25 to 49% at 14%, and those saying about 50 to 3/4 at 16%, and up to 100%, only 6% answering that question. Also, we asked remote work led roughly 5 million Americans to move to a new location in the past 2 years. Will you continue to work remotely permanently? Yes, saying 54%. No, saying I've returned to the office or plan to do my job that cannot be performed remotely. That is at 9%. And then the hybrid model, I would prefer a flexible role that allows me to work from the home and work as needed, that at 38%. And some of the comments, what organizational changes has your company made to achieve a more sustainable future? One comment from one of you, doing meetings virtually via Zoom and the GoToMeetings. We can all relate to that. Also, my prior role was 100% remote years before the pandemic. And so this viewer saying it cut down on the carbon footprint involved with travel. And another saying, I've seen my small changes, namely in our cafeteria and recycling. And then finally, this question, aside from compensation, which of the following is most important to you in evaluating a new role? 20% saying company culture and inclusion practices, which we've been talking about today. A company or corporation that is family friendly, 11% saying that is the priority. Social and environmental impact roles, that at 16%, and the vast majority saying flexibility in working hours and locations, that at 53%. By the way, for those of you who have missed any of this program, it will be posted shortly online at hill.com/events. I'm Steve Scully. Thank you for joining us. Hoping you enjoy the rest of your day.